It was a silence that didn't belong on live television. The kind of pause that feels longer than it is, not because of time, but because of tension. Across millions of screens, people leaned in just slightly, as if proximity would give them clarity. The lights were bright. The studio pristine. Two men sat across from each other, one, the former President of the United States. The other, one of the most tenacious Latino journalists of the century. Jorge Ramos didn't blink. He had waited years for this moment, an unfiltered, uncensored, live primetime conversation with Barack Obama. No teleprompters. No aides. No safety net. Obama, ever composed, had that slight head tilt that signaled two things: he was listening, and he was ready. He wore the same calm expression that had seen him through global crises, mass shootings, and political uprisings. But tonight wasn't about wars or Wall Street. It was about something far more personal. It was about promises. Broken, bent, and still clinging to hope. Tonight, Ramos began, we're not here to talk about approval ratings or legacy. We're here to talk about people. Undocumented people. Fathers. Mothers. Kids. And the question is simple, Mr. President, did you do enough? The words echoed. Not through the studio, but through living rooms, kitchen radios, hospital waiting rooms, and border towns lit by cell phone screens. Obama nodded slightly, but didn't answer. Not yet. The camera zoomed in. America was watching. He folded his hands. Cleared his throat. And then said. No. But I never stopped trying. And I never stopped believing they deserved better. It wasn't a defense. It wasn't a pivot. It was a beginning. The tension didn't break, it shifted. From adversarial to something else. Something rarer in today's media, a real conversation. A debate, yes. But one rooted in pain, policy, and possibility. This wasn't a campaign stop. This wasn't a puff piece. This was going to be something entirely different. And it had just begun. He came prepared with charts. But the ones that mattered weren't on paper. Jorge Ramos adjusted his glasses and tapped the table. Let's talk about numbers, Mr. President, he said, lifting a printed graph. Under your administration, more than 2.5 million people were deported. More than under any other president before you. How do you explain that to the families still waiting for a knock at the door? The studio was still. The kind of stillness that even the production crew dared not disturb. Obama looked at the paper, then raised his eyes, not to Ramos, but to the camera. Numbers can tell you how many. But they can't tell you who, he said. They won't show you the mother who was deported after a traffic stop. Or the honor student who cried himself to sleep in a detention center. Ramos pressed again. But those people needed protection, and you had the power. You promised change. Why didn't it come for them? Obama leaned in, his voice steady but deliberate. Change came too slowly. And in politics, slow often feels like betrayal. But let me tell you what those numbers leave out. They leave out DACA. They leave out the dreamers who went to school, got jobs, and stayed in the only country they've ever known because we refused to give up. The word refused landed with weight. You mean the program your successor tried to dismantle? Ramos asked. Obama nodded. Yes. And the one still standing because people fought for it. Because hope, once given, doesn't die quietly. He continued, we deported many, yes. But we also gave millions a chance to breathe. To plan. To dream. And for every deportation number you cite, I can show you a classroom that still has its brightest student. A hospital that still has its nurse. A family that still has its father. Ramos wasn't backing down. But don't you think you could have done more? Obama didn't flinch. Every night in that office, I asked myself that. Every morning I woke up, I tried to. There was no applause. No music. Just a moment. A moment where the former president, stripped of power and polish, chose humility over justification. And in that moment, Ramos saw it, not guilt, not excuse, but something rarer, the weight of leadership carried even after office. He reached for his next card but hesitated. Because for the first time, the numbers didn't feel like weapons. They felt like names. A signature is more than ink, it's a decision the world must live with. By the time the clock struck midnight, the West Wing had become a quiet battleground. Lights were dimmed in most offices, yet inside the Oval Office, the lamp on the resolute desk remained on, casting a long shadow behind Barack Obama as he leaned forward, sleeves rolled, brows furrowed. In front of him lay the most expensive document ever drafted in American history, the bailout bill. The ink had dried on every economist's signature but his. Aides had gone home. Advisors had stopped pushing. The printers had stopped printing. But Obama hadn't stopped thinking. On paper, the stimulus package was ready to rescue Wall Street. It was polished, strategic, and backed by decades of financial orthodoxy. But as he skimmed the clauses, something felt absent. Not in the numbers, but in the names. No mention of the factory worker in Indiana. No line for the teacher in Detroit. No echo of the single mother in South Side Chicago trying to buy groceries with hope. Obama's pen hovered. That pause wasn't hesitation. It was leadership being forged in silence. He turned the final page. And then, instead of signing it, he flipped the binder over and pulled out a blank sheet. He didn't call a meeting. He didn't summon experts. He began to write, by hand. What about the Main Street families? That's what he scribbled across the margin. Then again, but in a different form, how will this help people who don't know what derivatives are but know what late rent feels like? He didn't just edit. He restructured. A $3 billion clause suddenly had a new footnote, direct mortgage relief. A banking loophole was erased with one sentence: any institution receiving aid must cap executive bonuses to no more than the median household income. By the time dawn approached, the bailout was no longer a lifeline for the rich, it was a bridge for the working class. And all of it in his own handwriting. Morning light, meeting shock. At 8 a.m., the same advisors who had drafted the original version walked in. They saw the president's edits. They saw their entire framework disrupted. They saw their confidence replaced by something bolder, riskier, fairer. Sir, these changes will delay the vote. Obama didn't flinch. Then let them read what the vote is actually for. There was a murmur. One aide leaned forward. You rewrote fiscal precedent, Mr. President. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and replied, I rewrote our priorities. Backlash came swiftly. Markets panicked. Headlines screamed. Obama gambles with recovery. Wall Street lobbyists launched campaigns to block the bill. TV pundits spun speculation into frenzy. But the country wasn't watching the markets. They were watching a president refuse to blink. For the first time in the crisis, families saw themselves in the bill. Not as footnotes. Not as collateral. But as beneficiaries. Construction workers, small businesses, community clinics, they read line by line and saw lines written for them. And when the bill passed, it didn't pass quietly. It passed with a whisper that turned into a roar, from classrooms, barbershops, diners. From those who'd never thought a pen in D.C. could write their survival. That pen never shook. And history would remember that in the worst economic storm of the century, the hand that held it didn't either. You don't change a nation by raising your voice. You change it by refusing to lower your values. The East Room of the White House was rarely this full at 6 a.m. Senior economic advisors, Treasury officials, union representatives, small business delegates, and, most notably, 4 Republican senators had been called in for an emergency briefing. Nobody had been told why. They all assumed it was to prepare for the final vote, or to issue a walkback. After all, the edits President Obama had made overnight were stirring an uproar from K Street to Wall Street. The door opened quietly. No fanfare. No announcement. Just Barack Obama walking in with a thin folder and a thick silence following behind him. He didn't take the podium. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply laid the folder on the center of the table and looked around the room. "I've rewritten the bill," he said. A murmur. One senator leaned forward. "Without congressional markup?" Obama looked him straight in the eye. "Without letting the American people get written out again." The room didn't explode. It trembled. Not with rage, but with a shift, like tectonic plates quietly repositioning. For decades, the unspoken rule of emergency governance was this: stabilize the markets first, worry about the public later. But Obama had flipped that. He had recentered the nation's gaze, not on banks, but on barbershops, bus routes, broken schools, and families with broken trust. One Treasury official asked, "Won't this frighten investors?" Obama stepped forward. "What frightens them more is a country that doesn't believe in its own people. They need to know we've got their backs. But first, we need to prove we have our own." Then came the ripple. It began when one of the small business representatives, a Latina woman from Albuquerque, raised her hand. Her bakery had barely survived the crash. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Mr. President, I've never read legislation and felt like it was speaking to me. But last night, I did." No one breathed. A union rep from Pennsylvania added, "When I saw the clause about community health centers getting priority relief, I called my wife. She cried." The ripple grew. Not from speeches, but from stories. A farmer from Iowa mentioned the line on subsidized fuel access. A teacher from Chicago nodded at the paragraph ensuring school district funds. Each sentence the president had written by hand became a thread in a bigger story, one of visibility, dignity, and policy rooted in people, not profit margins. But not everyone in the room was on board. A senator from Kentucky scoffed. "This is populism, not economics." Obama's reply was calm. "It's both. If economics don't serve the people, then they're not sustainable, they're decoration." Another pushed, "This sets a dangerous precedent. Presidents shouldn't rewrite bills on emotion." Obama stepped closer. "It wasn't emotion that wrote this. It was responsibility." Then something rare happened. An economist from the Congressional Budget Office stood up. He wasn't known for speeches, he was known for numbers. "I recalculated the impact this morning," he said. "This version isn't just more humane, it's more efficient. Direct relief boosts velocity. This will stabilize faster than projected." A beat passed. And then something even rarer occurred. The Republican senator who had first challenged Obama cleared his throat and said, "Then maybe it's time we stop pretending compassion and strategy are opposites." That was the moment the room reshaped. Not physically, but in posture, in energy, in silence. They weren't adversaries debating clauses anymore. They were stakeholders in a turning point. Obama didn't gloat. He didn't capitalize. He simply closed the folder and said, "We don't get many chances like this. If we fail quietly, the damage will be loud." He walked toward the door. Then stopped. "One more thing," he said, turning halfway. "The world's watching us. Not to see how we help the rich recover, but to see if we remember who fell first." And with that, he left. The folder remained on the table, but the real change had already taken place. In a room built for protocol, someone had used a pen not to sign tradition, but to scratch through it. And those seated around that table would never forget the morning when a ripple, started in ink, reshaped everything.
If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that move the world. Thanks for watching.